Once upon a time, there was a lonely woodcutter who lived in a tiny cottage in the woods with his 2 children, Hansel and Gretel. The woodcutter was poor and couldn't afford to feed his children much. They were constantly hungry and always went to bed with growling stomachs. He pitied them, but whatever food he could scrap up, it wasn't enough to satisfy the children. The woodcutter, being a selfless father, gave his children whatever morsels of food he could gather, even if it meant not eating himself, and the starvation soon took its toll on the old woodcutter, and so he died in the old cottage. The children stayed in the old cottage, as they were too small, too afraid to travel into the local village on their own to fetch for help from the townsfolk. But after their food supply deteriorated, they had no choice but to leave the cottage and search for food. But surely they would suffer the same fate as their desperate father. Hansel and Gretel wandered through the dark woods for days, unable to find the right path that led them out of the black trees into town. They nibbled on the wild berries and drank rainwater from the leaves to sustain themselves. But they were growing weaker and weaker from malnourish. They slept under canopies and sheltered themselves from pouring rain with moss. But it was clear that the 2 tiny children couldn't last much longer out there. One day, when the children were growing dizzy and disoriented from lack of food, they stumbled into a clearing. In it was a tiny house made from rich gingerbread. Oh, what a splendid sight it was! It had peppermint canes for window frames, and flower baskets full of fruit cakes, and toffee glazed windows, and chocolate chip cookies for roof tiles. It was wonderful. Hansel and Gretel have never seen food so delicious. Ravenous, the children made a staggering dash for the gingerbread house, desperate to finally eat something worthwhile after so long of starving in the woods. But upon reaching the gingerbread house, the gingerbread door swung open, and there stood a kindly old witch. The wrinkled old hag took pity on the 2 trembling children. With their baggy clothes and their sunken eyes and chapped lips and frail frames, she simply couldn't let them stay out there in the dark and the cold. They'd catch their death. The old witch welcomed the 2 children into her gingerbread home and ushered them inside. Once inside, Hansel and Gretel peered around. It was clear how tiny the little gingerbread house was, that the old witch lived alone in the woods. Perfect. The children rounded on the kindly witch, and smiled sadly down at the skinny, starved babes. The gingerbread house had looked tasty to Hansel and Gretel, but they'd found something much, much more tastier.